you from cities all over the world, produced in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is the Places for Good podcast. We bring you the designers, planners, and placemakers who shape the shared spaces of tomorrow, from stories of the past to visions for the future. We talk pride of place wherever you are. I'm your host, Boopsie Maran. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Places for Good podcast. Today we have a returning guest, passionate play advocate from West Auckland, Bea Enriquez. She is joining us today to co-host and have fun with our much-anticipated guest, Tim Gill. I hope you enjoy this special episode where Bea and I come together to learn from one of the world's most greatest advocates for children's outdoor play and more child-friendly neighborhoods. Thank you for being here to co-host with me today, Bea.
Thanks, Boopsie. Happy to be here again. Our special guest today is the author of Urban Playground, How Child-Friendly Urban Planning and Design Can Save Cities, and No Fear, Growing Up in a Risk-Averse Society. He is a former director of the Children's Play Council, now called Play England. His work cuts across public policy, education, childcare, planning, transport, urban design, and play work. Please welcome Tim Gill.
Hi, it's great to be here.
We're really privileged to have you here, Tim. I remember back in Season 1, Boopsie asked us, who should we interview next? And the Play Nerds here in New Zealand and I just received your book, and including myself and Scott McKenzie, we were absolutely fizzing over your newly released book. I just had to have you on the show, and honestly, it's worth it having this after almost 2 years, and I'm so glad we're here.
Nice to see you, Tim.
Yeah, it's great to see you, and thanks so much for that generous feedback. I wanted the book to have an international scope, and so to hear that it's reached all the way to New Zealand is a real thrill.
That's awesome. From your book, I really enjoyed the fact that you included the play triangle, but expanded on that. Can you go into some detail about the play pyramid?
Sure. So as some of your readers will know, the play triangle is really a sort of very simple way of thinking about what are the broad things that need to be in place for children to be able to play. And there's the triangle is, space. So children need a space or some space to play. Time, time in their daily lives to play. And then the third bit of the triangle is sort of what you might call adult attitudes or social attitudes. It doesn't need to be an adult presence, but just that the adults allow the play to happen. And I think that's a good set of sort of principles. But I added a fourth one. So it turns from a triangle into a pyramid. And my fourth point is around other children. And now, logically, of course, children do sometimes play on their own. But the point I was making is that we are a social species, and that other children, children seek out other children a lot in their play. And so if we forget about that social aspect of play, and particularly the hunger that children have to be with other children, then we can go down a kind of, we can get a bit focused on the adults or focused on individuals and forget about some of the wonderful emergent stuff that happens when kids are playing with other kids. So I really thought it was important to have that last bit of the pyramid in people's minds.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge takeaway for us to understand that humans are social beings, and including that for children is so vital. So one thing from interviewing kids, barriers to play always came up, and they always said it was their parents that wouldn't let them. I mean, that's a part of the play triangle. How do we shift attitudes of parents to support play?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Here's what I don't think we do. I don't think we try and educate parents or get parents awareness. I just think that's a dead end. Parents have got so many people telling them what to do already. I don't know if it's helpful to add another bunch of people telling them what to do. Yeah. So I'm more focused on what is it? What are the barriers for parents? And there are often barriers around safety and around, time and like some of the stuff we just talked about, spaces, attitudes, time. I think the way we help parents allow kids to play is to tackle some of those material barriers, the physical barriers about traffic and lack of space, some of the barriers in terms of time, about the time pressures on parents, the attitudes where, parents feel that maybe somebody's going to judge them badly if they let their kids play out or go out and play on their own. I think that's more helpful than sort of, like trying to directly say to parents, you should be letting your kids play out more. Now, that's the beginning of an answer, but I really do, I'm a parent myself. My daughter's now grown up, but I know that there's a lot of people out there in different ways kind of trying to tell parents how to do their job. And I don't think it's helpful to just add to that list of commands or moral messages. We clearly want parents to be on side, but I think parents are on side in the sense that I don't think any parent says, oh yeah, play is a waste of time. Or very few parents say that. Parents know that it's good for kids to have some time where they're, having fun and following their own inclinations and having a bit of an adventure. So let's tackle the barriers and let's not become create another sort of bit of finger wagging for parents.
Absolutely. It's to get to their level and understand their barriers and be a bit more empathetic, isn't it? Because there are a lot of holders.
And just one more thing. I think that it's really helpful when we're speaking to parents or any adults to kind of reconnect them with their own childhoods and with that sense of how strong the drive is for children to explore, to the children's curiosity, their appetite for experience. So talking to parents about their own childhoods and the fun things they used to do and how important a sort of taste of freedom is in all of that, I think that is helpful. But that's not about lecturing or giving them knowledge. It's about helping them reconnect emotionally with why, play and everyday freedoms are important.
That sounds on point. And I feel like, I'm not a parent myself. It just seems like it's the way to go to understand a bit more instead of judging them from where they are. Cool.
Yeah.
So back to your book. You cover a lot of cities in your book. And can you tell us more about some of your favorites, like Ghent?
Sure. So all the cities that I picked, there's about a dozen, as you know, they're all cities that have taken seriously the idea that we should be making the built form of our cities, the streets, the parks, the squares, work better for children. They're not necessarily all child-friendly places right now, but they've all put, time and money and effort into becoming more child-friendly. And Ghent is absolutely one of the leaders of that. It's a historic university town. It's about 250,000 population. It's got, historic core. It's got a sort of 19th century belt, and then it's got a kind of more modern suburban belt around that. Very common for European cities. But what's really interesting in Ghent is how the idea of being a child-friendly city has become part of the DNA of Ghent. It's really, you see it when you visit. You'll see, signs up about child-friendly cafe, or you'll see posters for play streets, up in people's windows. So, and that's borne out in the municipality. So the city of Ghent has a team of officers who are in a central location, but work with different departments. So they work with transport, they work with the parks department, they work with urban regeneration, and they bend the projects that those teams are working on. So there's always a child-friendly layer or a child-friendly lens, you might say, into a project. So in the book, I write about a big regeneration scheme in a rundown, disadvantaged 19th century neighborhood. And so there's a lot of investment going to this neighborhood. And what the team did was they worked with the planners and the transport people to create, to rejuvenate spaces, to open up some public spaces, to literally weave together the schools, shops, parks, the new spaces, and connect them all to the city centre. And the key sort of interesting thing was this thing called the red carpet, which was a pedestrian, it's like a pedestrian route, so the allusion to a sort of magic carpet, is really, and it is actually red, it's red tiles or sort of terracotta tiles going right through the neighborhood. So it's a very powerful physical set of features that put into practice this idea of being a child-friendly neighborhood. And, there's some nice photos and maps that bring it to life in the book as well.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. And honestly, just hearing about the red carpet, like a lot of the design and play just makes you laugh. Even I don't have to see it. I hear it and it makes me really, really joyful.
Well, it's funny
Yeah.
because thinking about red carpet, now the shift is from the real life to the technical side. So it's how technology plays a role. Because I've used apps from Australia to do quality of life kind of surveys. And then the next layer is having the kid be the expert. And in Norway, how they use technology to play a part in child's play, but also make them the auditor, it almost seems like. So
Yeah.
I'm really curious
Yeah.
about that chapter, part of your book, talking about the traffic agents. I found that like my main questions about it were the parents okay with their children being attached to that device as an auditor, if the tool was helpful, and that's why they let them do it, and how the bureaucrats were able to get to a space where they were very okay with the fact that the person providing the data was under 18.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just briefly. So the traffic agent it was really neat. It was why I went to Oslo, was to find out more about it.
Oh.
So it is a smartphone app, and the idea is that the children are the users, and they provide this intelligence. As you're right, it's sort of it's like you're a secret agent and you're spying on your neighborhood, and they will just share problems that they face on their trip to school with the highways department. So the data goes straight to the highways department. Now, it's actually, there was a lot of thought and piloting and, tests. You can imagine it's not a little kind of, couple of sort of, I don't know, techno geeks in a room. It was one of the big consultancy firms who put it together. It was a big budget operation. So they ensure they ironed out all of those. They had answers to all of those questions. So they had, it was anonymized. I think the data didn't start until the children were a certain distance away from their home. So it was impossible to, get information about where children lived or anything like that. And all of those, and the parents, I think, had to give their permission. And a lot of it was done through promoting the tool with schools. Mm-hmm. So the schools were a kind of gatekeeper or an honest broker, if you like, for that project. And it's actually a fixed term project. So as far as I'm aware, it is now over, which is a bit of a shame, but it was always going to be just running for, I think, 4 or 5 years. And firstly, it showed that that data was incredibly valuable. It really made a difference. So on a simple level, kids could say to the transport team, there's this bush and it's just growing too big and it needs to be trimmed down. Mm-hmm. And by that afternoon, it had been done, because they just sent somebody out to do it. But then for more complicated issues, like traffic junctions or, badly planned routes, the people in the highways department could then put it into their longer term planning to say, this junction is really important for children. So we need to make that a priority. And so it's quite a rare example, I think, of where you've got children's participation clearly making a tangible difference to the built environment. So I think that was really powerful.
I'm curious if they respect the kids now, having done that practice in Norway at that same level without the app, if maybe they're still involved in the process. That would be interesting to follow up.
Well, it would be. I mean, and I don't know for sure. What I do know is Norway is one of the few countries where it's written into law that children's views and concerns have to be taken into account in planning. So, every municipality has to show that it does that.
That's
fantastic. It's like an appreciation.
It's interesting because it wasn't always working well. So that law goes back, I think, to the 90s. And when it first came in, it's like a lot of things, it first comes in, municipalities pick it up, they take it seriously. Then for 10, 15 years later, it sort of gets a bit tired.
Yeah, it's a state.
So they're now they've sort of revived that, and the central government is looking at how it can ramp up a focus on children again. So one of the lessons for me is, those legal devices, they can be really helpful, but sometimes they're not enough on their own. You need people, and you need maybe an ongoing push from the powers that be to make sure that these tools are actually properly used.
And that's interesting, kind of tied to the technology, but going back to human senses. I guess sometimes when you're collecting data, right, there's a qualitative data. And one of the questions I asked in my previous episodes to people, which I think is important for children, is what are things that people taste or sound? When you ever hear children talk about their routes to school or safety, are there any other senses they talk about other than just what they see? Have you ever heard of children saying it stinks here or it sounds funny, or what are some senses that you've heard in your work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think one of the ways in which bringing children's voices and views in helps is because, it gets us away from being very rational and also by visual focused. Children want to be active, right? So there's something of just using their bodies. Okay, that's more than visual. That's proprioception. That's so thinking about how places allow children to be active and to explore is really important. But children also, they're very aware of, the kind of, a place is just nice, are they really noisy? Noise is definitely a thing that children talk about. And we're beginning to know more, I think, about the effect of noise pollution on all of us. But there's some evidence that it's particularly, excessive noise levels are particularly harmful for children and for children's learning as well. And I think, children do talk about, this place is a bit scuzzy or it's dirty. I mean, they might not necessarily say it smells funny or whatever, but they will be alive to those features of a neighborhood that say it's being neglected, that it's just not cared for. Yeah. And they really don't like that.
Yeah.
And that goes for air pollution as well, of course.
Well, just can I dig deep a little bit more for that question, just for your personal experience? Do you have places you felt safe at home? And what were the senses around that by chance? Like a smell or sound that you remember that brings you back to that childhood state of safety, play?
Well, I mean, since you use that word safe, I mean, safe is a tricky word, I think, because, I mean, for me, I just think, where do I feel good? Where do I feel kind of free and grounded and just relaxed. And for me, that is often about being in places that are quiet. Birdsong is a really big thing. I know I'm very aware of the difference between if I'm in a place where I can hear birdsong on the one hand or where I can't on the other. It sounds kind of trivial in a way, but I was in Amsterdam a couple of months ago to do some work, and it really struck me how large parts of the city are quiet enough that you can hear the birdsong, even if you're on the street. And it's simply because there's not so much traffic, because again, the Dutch they've really cracked that challenge of reducing the dominance of the car in the places where we live. And so, that's definitely a thing for me, sort of birdsong, feeling the breeze in my hair and getting away from those noises of a busy, kind of car-dominated place.
And I like that you took away the sound of construction or cars, how loud cars can be, and put it to the other end, which is birdsong, which is lovely.
Yeah.
I know.
And I'm sure, I mean, it must be I know you didn't have so many lockdowns in New Zealand, but, it was really striking that, very difficult period when we had lockdowns here in the UK and lots of terrible things about them, that period. But one thing that everybody was saying was just how incredibly wonderful it was to be, where there was just quiet when you were out in the streets and where those senses of nature and of calmness were very, very striking. And I think we need to remember that now as we think about how we want cities to be in the future, and to try and keep hold of some of those good things that happened and the value of those experiences that we can have. It's not impossible, as I saw in Amsterdam, to create cities where you do have opportunities, where places are quiet and calm and not, just completely dominated by the noises and smells and sounds of traffic and industry.
Yeah. It's really vital that you said that, given the fact that I was going to ask if you, that I saw your latest photo that you dropped us, that you came to Abel Tasman.
Yeah. That was really special, actually. And, I'm not going to go on about just holidays, but I know that in New Zealand, there's something in your culture that is very, the adventure and beauty and the kind of wonder of your landscapes, is part of your culture. And So yeah, it was great for me to have the chance to see that for myself.
It's definitely, definitely enjoyed seeing that photo of you on the swing. Anyway, through your consultation and work and beyond your books, any tips for getting in front of politicians, stakeholders, and all across the sectors to prioritize play?
I think, it kind of obviously depends where people are, but I think connecting with decision makers at an emotional level is really helpful. Getting politicians to care about children, and that's, I'm going to link to what I was saying about reconnecting with our own childhoods. I do often in my talks and even in consultancy work, try early on to have a conversation or get conversations going with the adults in the room about their memories, their childhood memories of where they used to play and of their favorite places to play and what they did and who they were with. Because what almost always comes out is that the most resonant memories from our own childhoods are places where we were out of doors and, we were out of sight of adults, where we really were kind of, and it may not be like deep in the bush or anything, but just places where we could have a sense of our own freedom, where the concerns of our parents or whoever, were receded, and where we could feel that we were in control and just having our own, making our own fun. And the resonance of those memories means that it's a springboard for conversations with politicians and planners and others about what, firstly, that's changed, that it's different for children today. Children have a lot less freedom, and that's clear. And that's not great. There might be lots of things about childhood today that are actually better than they were 40 or 60 years ago. This isn't a general sort of saying there was a golden age to grow up and that today's children are going to hell in a handcart. It's not about that at all. It's just about that shining a spotlight on children's everyday freedoms, on outdoor play, on getting around, being able to go and see your mates, gradually exploring your neighborhood as you grow up, biking, and then making the links then with things like, health, with community and feelings of belonging. And then also the bigger picture of sustainability and how we create more sustainable towns and cities. Yeah. And again, you'll know this in my book, one of the strongest messages I come back to is that if we ask ourselves, what does a child-friendly place look like? Well, it's compact. Things are close to each other. It's easy to get around on foot or by bike, because that's how kids do get around. And it's green, it's green and pleasant. And that's a sustainable neighborhood, right? Yeah, child-friendly neighborhood looks and feels like a sustainable neighborhood. So that's a really powerful insight for politicians. Anyone who's listening to this who wants to kind of shift the needle on creating more sustainable neighborhoods, talk about children, talk with children, get children's views into the conversation. And that will help you have a more concrete vision of what the direction you need to be going in. And also it will help build consensus and, long-term support, because everybody cares about kids, right? I think there isn't anybody who's, I just want to live my own life and I don't really care at all about, how my town or city is going to be for my children or my friends' children or for the future generations. People do care about that stuff. And so child-friendly planning is a way to build that shared vision of what towns and cities need to look like and feel like and the direction that we need to go.
The hub and spoke, I think that was the...
Yeah, and I guess to tie that in, I realized in your last chapter, you created that hub and spoke implementation model.
Yeah, so this is really focusing on municipalities, right? What can councils do to get good things to happen? Now, the people will say, why are you focusing on councils in the first place? Well, I'm focusing on municipalities because they actually do have the levers of power, right? One of the things, children, where do they play? How do they get around? They play in parks, they play in schoolyards, they play in streets, they have to deal with traffic, they get into school and back. These are all services and functions that municipalities manage, right? So the municipalities hold most of the levers of power. Of course, what they do is shaped by central government, and there are messages here for central government as well. But there's a lot that any municipality can do if they want to. And so the hub and spoke model is just, it was what I was seeing when I visited these cities that were doing good things. In lots of cases, what was the catalyst for change? It was an officer. It was one or maybe more than one person in the municipality who took up this issue, who said to themselves, I'm going to try and make good things happen for kids. And I'm in a position to do that. So, and so that's the hub. Yeah. That's the center of the model. And then the spokes are just the connections, crucially connections with planning and with transport, because, I cannot overemphasize the importance of mobility in all of this. Children want to be able to get around on their own.
Yeah.
And that if children get around more, they can go to more places and they can have more fun. And we know this from studies, right? So the best studies that measure how much children play and what are the different neighborhood factors that shape how much children play, the time children spend playing, the most important factors are highways and street and transport factors, right? The streets are safe. It's not the presence or absence of playgrounds. I mean, of course, playgrounds are part of the picture, but it's really interesting. The single most important factor that comes through when you look at these good studies of children playing out, the single most important factor is essentially neighborhoods that support walking and cycling for kids. So that is absolutely crucial. And coming back to my model, the hub and spoke model, connections with transport, highways, as well as, planning and parks. Then also, effective participation. So there's a spoke there around engagement, crucially engagement with children, but also engagement with, others in the community and other stakeholders.
So do you think a lot of the effectiveness of that model depends on people understanding that it's worth the cost? That whatever that infrastructure cost, it's valuable and has a purpose, and you can't say it costs too much.
Well, right. I mean, short answer, yes. Slightly longer answer. I mean, every municipality has, limited budgets, so we know all that. So this is about saying, I think if you have got some resource, how do you use that effectively? I think that's where the hub and spoke model comes in.
Okay.
And it might just be half of one person's time, but it's just saying you need a focus, you need a catalyst who's a person. And the other reason why it's important for it to be a person, I think, rather than say a policy, is that these children play, as I've said before, children play in different places. And this is an emerging idea, the idea of child-friendly planning. So you really need someone who's got a bit of spark, who can make those connections, who also gets it, and understands for themselves what the objectives are and the links with sustainability. The link that, by the way, also links with just economic success, right? We didn't talk too much about this, but one of the messages from a lot of the cities that I spoke to is that they had realized, that city leaders had realized, that they really need to attract and retain families. If you're a city and you're not attracting and retaining families to come and live in your city, then your long-term economic prospects are pretty grim. It may take 5, 10, 20 years for that to pan out. That's precisely why Rotterdam put together the program it did. Yeah. And that's why I devote a whole chapter in the book. More than any other city, I write about Rotterdam in some detail. So again, yes, there's the cost to municipalities to creating that, that catalyst, that central focus, but the potential benefits are huge, and they cross a number of areas. They cross children's health, well-being, sustainability, and economic prospects. And I think that's a pretty powerful way to join the dots. If I were a politician, I'd be thinking, wow, this is not somebody coming along and telling me that here's an 8th or 9th or 10th thing I should be doing. What the politician should be hearing is, this is going to make my job easier in a way and make me more able to bring forward some of the ideas that are already, on the table, that I just need a bit more of a push for, or need to be able to be blunt, to sell more effectively.
And have you ever had a city where the politician or the leader or the elected member is that spark, is that person that just goes, hard out and just gets it done?
Yeah, definitely. So Tirana in Albania, pretty tough city. I could also talk about Bogota in Colombia, where the former mayor, as you know, was Enrique Peñalosa, a very, high-profile urbanist. One of his most powerful maxims is one that I quote in my book about, children are an indicator species for cities. That if we want cities to work well for everyone, we make them work well for children. And in Tirana, the relatively new mayor, Erion Veliaj, came in, this is about 8 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And in the first place, he actually landed on children a little bit by accident. He started a program to improve nurseries and the indoor and outdoor space in nurseries. Right. And he suddenly realized, my God, people really love this. So, this is really, it's a kind of, it's an emblematic.
Yeah.
It's not just important, it's a kind of symbol of how the city is turning itself around by focusing on the prospects of its youngest children. So then he started running another program about playgrounds. And mostly it was actually reclaiming playgrounds in neighborhoods that had been taken over by parked cars. So what happened over the previous 10 or 15 years in the city was there'd been an explosion in car ownership. Because remember, this is coming out of the communist era, where there were, precisely 38 cars in the whole city of 500,000 people. And then suddenly everybody had a car, and the cars were like, it was like pests. They were spreading everywhere across the whole city. And so Veliaj and his team pushed back against that and started this program. Every month they'd open a new neighborhood playground. And again, what they found was that people absolutely loved these spaces, not just children, but, parents and grandparents. Okay. Yeah. So in Albania, grandparents have a really important role in family life. Often they live with the family, and they're, so they're part of the fabric, the social fabric of the neighborhood. And so his team was suddenly, they were getting lots of older people, voters, of course, who were saying, oh, it's so wonderful having these spaces where we can sit out and just watch children play or soak up the sun and watch the world go by. So that then was the next step was for him to create a more strategic focus. And he championed that. And he had some pretty big battles. There's one notorious battle that he had about a playground improvement. I won't go into all the details because part of it is, it's about the kind of,
sounds like a war.
Sort of very divisive nature. So in Tirana politics, there was a huge partisan split between two political parties. And so, the high levels of mistrust and a massive battle about a playground, what seemed like a really innocent playground project in the city's most prominent high-profile park. And, he had to battle for months to get that playground built. But when he did that, it then just kind of reinforced for him the symbolic value of a focus on children. So he's very much a champion, and he has had that sort of central catalyst role that in some cities. So in my book, I talk about officer plus politician. I mean, I think officers can do very good things on their own. Over time, of course, you ultimately do need some political leadership, but sometimes it takes an officer to help to build that. And I think I saw that in Ghent, for instance, where actually a lot of the good work that happened in Ghent over the years was one officer. But then by the time I went to visit the city in 2018, the deputy mayor who was relatively new, had really taken up the banner, the rallying cry with a lot of enthusiasm. So, and a final message, there's no magic recipe for all of this. I mean, I wouldn't want your listeners to think, oh yeah, all I need to do is find some officer, get them to sign up to some principles and then wonderful things will happen. No, it does take a lot of hard work. This is an emerging agenda. One of the other recipes or ingredients I put in the book, principles, is opportunism, right? So imagine you are this officer, or even you're just an advocate or an activist in your patch. Yep. Just look around. Where are the built environment projects happening? Where is there a big regeneration scheme or a new housing development or a park improvement scheme? How can you have a conversation with the people who are working on those projects and just say, hey, have you thought about children in this? Have you made the links between making them better for children and making them more sustainable? Have you realized that you don't just have to put a kind of boring fixed equipment playground in. You know, you could do something that's got nature that could then, you could also help with managing flood, right? Huge issue, I know, in some parts of New Zealand. You know, we're having to rethink the job that nature can do in our cities and build in these, essentially these sponges and these ways that rainwater can be captured. Well, let's make them playful places as well. And then again, you've got a win-win. So, but that's a good example of opportunistic thinking. And that's another reason why a good catalyst within the municipality can make great things happen.
Before I close on something that's tied to this topic, but I want it to be the last question, is there anything in the book that we haven't touched on that you really wanted to, that we might have missed in one of our questions that
you want to talk about?
Yeah.
I really wanted to, the single most important diagram or concept in my book, really the only bit of theory in the book, is that framework, that two-dimensional framework that makes any child-friendly neighborhood or town or city.
Yeah.
And so to be child-friendly, you need two things really, in very simple terms. You need a lot of offers, fun things for children to do, different types of space, leisure, recreation, places to meet. So that's the things to do, right? The diet of things to do dimension. But you also need that second dimension, which is mobility. How easy is it for children to get to those different places and spaces?
Absolutely.
And it's only where you've got both a lot of choice of places, things to do and go, and it's very easy for children to get around on foot or by bike. It's only where you got both of those that you're in that child-friendly spot or quadrant. I think that I really want that message to run through, runs through the book like a stick of rock. So I know, and for instance, when it comes to density, what that means is that, density is a bit like a Goldilocks topic, right?
Yeah.
Density is too low, everything's too far apart. And so it's hard for kids to get around. And also a lot of sprawling areas, they're just basically housing, right? Or maybe housing plus one or two parks. It's very boring. On the other hand, if you've got really high density, then you've got almost, there's no public space or there's tiny scraps of space and hundreds of kids trying to use that. So that's no good either. But there's a sort of happy medium, and it probably varies in different countries because there's different social attitudes and cultural attitudes in different parts of the world. What looks good in New Zealand won't be the same as what looks good in Hong Kong or Singapore.
Yeah.
But in all of these places, there's a kind of sweet spot. And so, the reason why that's important is because I think in English-speaking countries, in high-income countries, in Australia, New Zealand, UK, the States, lots of parts of Europe, we sort of have this idea that, what's really good for kids is having loads of space and, moving out of the smoke of the city and into suburbia. No, that is not true. It really, there's very clear evidence now that sprawling suburbs are not great places for kids to grow up. And the basic reason why goes back to that two-dimensional framework that I talked about.
Yeah.
There's not enough choice and variety in a residential suburb, and it's very difficult for kids to get around for all sorts of reasons, but partly because places are too far away from each other and partly because they're very car dominated.
Okay, that with that in mind, it's Wednesday morning in London. You look out your window, you're Mayor Tim, and you are in a city that has more money than, let's say, parts of Albania and Bogota. So what are you going to do? What are you, and you're the mayor and you're also the champion here. So knowing what you know now, what's your plan? What's your plan for your area?
I would really want to focus on the streets where people live, because, think about life from the point of view of a child or parents of a child. The streets are the first place we reach when we step outside the front doors of our homes. Right? Yeah. So they're the beginnings of our literal and figurative journeys anywhere, anywhere in the neighborhood or beyond. So how do those streets look? What do they look like? What do they feel like? Are they places that even invite us to go out of our houses? So having programs that really change the way people think about streets. So it'd probably be a whole basket of, like a menu of things. Running play street sessions where you just stop the street traffic for a couple of hours a week. so that kids can come out and play. School streets programs, where you're really encouraging more children to walk and cycle by stopping parents from driving right the way up to the school gate. But you're also creating a temporary space where kids can play, where parents can meet and chat and good things can happen. And then also, more long-term or permanent physical changes to streets to reduce the speed and volume of traffic, to actually take out some of the parking, move the car parking around. In Rotterdam, one of the things that is in the policy of the city is that where they can, they actually take out the street parking on one side of a residential street and widen the sidewalks, widen the pavements, so that side of the street then becomes a sort of doorstep, playful place.
Wow.
Now, it's not always possible to do that, but I have seen examples in the city of where that's happened. I've got a photo of it in my book. So if I were mayor, I'd have a really strong focus on rethinking streets, making streets more playful and child friendly, and showing the good things that happen when when you do that. And I would do that, and I would know that would get pushback, right? Because we do live everywhere in cities that have basically been designed around the needs of the car for the last 100 years. And it takes energy and commitment and actually courage to turn that around. And that's why we're seeing some pushback around some of these ideas. In the UK, there's been big battles and to be honest, some slightly crazy talk, in my view, about, measures that are trying to reduce.
I'm tempted to push to Mayor Gill. I'm the crazy person with the crazy talk. I'm curious. Well, how do you respond? Because it's so rare to have an expert in the field, right? And here you are expert in child-friendly cities and highly respected. And you have this crazy is the wrong adjective. You have that pushback.
Yeah.
What's a sentence that's helpful at times when you have someone really upset, they love their car, they can't pick their kid up at school in the car and drive them to tennis and then get in their car and drive them to the other class and then get home. You've ruined their life.
Yeah. I think I start with two things. There are probably, right, how things are now is not working, right? We have real problems, right? And everybody agrees. So even that parent will agree there's too much traffic. I don't believe there's a single driver who says, no, there's not too much traffic in my neighborhood. So, so start with a kind of shared, consensus about the problem and also about the positive vision. What is, in 10, 20 years time, do we want cities with more traffic, where it's harder to walk and cycle, where fewer kids walk to school? I don't think anybody would sign up to that. So you have that long-term vision, and then, you get the political capital to take steps towards that vision. And that's a part,
courageous steps.
So, and you recognize that there will always be some people who are upset, and they may actually have good reason to be upset, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that everybody who's protesting about all this is somehow mean or hates kids or is, sort of right-wing conspiracy theorists. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that at all, right? And I think those of us who are trying to make the case for these progressive changes need to remember people are upset and some people are losing out. Okay. And just say one more thing, that is the way of politics, right? If there were a way of making the world a better place where everybody 100% said, yes, this is brilliant, and nobody at all loses out, well, politicians will be doing it already, right?
Yeah.
The difficult decisions in politics are always decisions where some people win and some people lose. And it's about who's winning and who's losing. So it's about fairness. It's about, trade-offs. And I think it's hard to argue that children are losing the most with how cities are working right now. That's a big message early on in my book. Children are unhealthy. They're suffering from air pollution. They're getting more obese. Their mental health is declining.
Yeah.
There's, if you want to talk about children as an indicator species, if you like, if they're the canaries in the coal mine for cities, then they're, what are they telling us right now through their own levels of health and well-being? They're telling us that cities are not healthy places. So, I think that's, as a mayor, again, I would be really framing a lot of my conversations about this is about the long-term health and well-being and prospects of our youngest citizens. And that is a fair starting point, because right now, my city is not doing well by those citizens.
You have my vote.
Thank you.
Well, this is where we'll, and I think this is where we'll close on that, because that was so inspirational. And I really wish I could vote for you from New Zealand and you could make my city child friendly. So,
or you could come to New Zealand and we can vote for you here.
So I'm going to thank Bea for bringing you to us, the Places for Good podcast, and for being a fantastic co-host. Thank you, Bea.
Oh, thanks, Boopsie, and thanks, Tim. I really appreciate the time, but honestly, just being sucked into the conversation got me. As soon as she told me, Tim's here, I'm here. I want to listen. I want to understand.
And then having you both here today has been really great. So thank you so much, Tim, for sharing with us the importance of play and building a more resilient and stronger community. And just, it was fantastic to learn so much about a child-friendly city.
Well, thank you both so much for such a lively conversation. And I'd love to come back to New Zealand at some time. I don't think I'm quite up for standing for political office yet, but certainly spreading the word about child-friendly cities, I'm always happy to do.
I hope you found our chat with Tim Gill, the author of Urban Playground, How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities, as interesting as I did. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please share with a friend, and let's continue to grow and seed new ways of playing and connecting in our cities and across the world. Thanks for listening.